Guacamelee is an indie video game, initially released in 2013 for the PlayStation 3 and PlayStation Vita. During its development, it received funding from Sony, which guaranteed temporary exclusivity for the PlayStation platforms. It was later released on Windows, Mac OS, and Linux through Steam, and is currently planned for release on the PlayStation 4, Wii U, and Xbox One. Guacamelee is a prime example of the indie game revolution in recent years. Although it was developed by Drinkbox Studios with only 10 people, it became a fan favorite and it was a commercial success. The game combines elements of action, platform, and exploration video games, delivering gameplay that blends throwbacks to classic video games and a nice dose of freshness. It can be called a Metroidvania, a genre that, as the name implies, was established by the Metroid and Castlevania series. What that means is that the progression in the game is defined by soft boundaries. The game world is relatively free to explore, with areas being made accessible through power-ups acquired by the character.
The game aesthetic and narrative employ stereotypical Mexican cultural signifiers in a way that cater to the overall lighthearted but somewhat offensive narrative. The objective of the game revolves around you, the protagonist, a Mexican agave farmer who somewhat mysteriously turns into a powerful luchador named Juan Aguacate. The player, who is now a powerful luchador, must save the daughter of the president, who is obviously also the love of his life, and is referred to as during the entirety of the game as El Presidente's daughter. El Presidente's daughter's life is in peril by Carlos Calacaca, an evil sombrero-wearing skeleton who is attempting to take over both the living world and the dead world on Dios de los Muertos. This plotline is pretty simple and straightforward, and ultimately can be boiled down to a typical damsel-in-distress narrative, accompanied by a good amount of dialogue that also acts as a ludological device in leading the player to side missions and in the right direction in order to ultimately fulfill the objective of the game.
The simplicity of the plot is yet another throwback to the classic games the developers appear to love.
The game also utilizes visual content to contribute to the narrative and enhance the mildly immersive narrative experience. It refers to popular and influential video games and video game culture. The use of subtle imagery alludes to well-known popular video games, including Mario Bros., The Legend of Zelda, Minecraft, Donkey Kong, and obviously Metroid, along with many others. There are also many references to contemporary pop culture phenomena, specifically internet memes, in order to appeal to not only a gaming community, but also a more widely based media consumer demographic. The visual design of the game, as well as the content, create a playful and fun gaming experience, despite the fact that the representation and the content itself can be problematic to say the least. An appeal of the game can be found in the classic design and its reference to earlier video games.
To be a truly great game, the fun style of Guacamelee had to be backed up by equally engaging gameplay. Luckily, Drinkbox certainly delivered on the game's methodology. Guacamelee's gameplay has two cores, the combat and the exploration. The first is defined by fast-paced, combo-based melee fights. Our hero Juan is a luchador, so his fighting techniques are based around punching, kicking, and throwing. By combining normal attacks, special moves, dodges, and grabbing enemies, the player can chain long combos that are extremely fun to pull off, even though there's no direct reward for showing more skill than you need to. However, you can use the coins dropped by enemies to enhance Juan's ability through upgrades and shops. The same power-ups that give Juan an edge during combat are also used for the game's exploration segments. The Rooster Uppercut, for example, allows Juan to reach platforms that his basic jumps can't reach. Other abilities range from running up walls to transforming into a chicken. These soft boundaries are the classic staple of the Metroidvania games, and Guacamelee uses them very well. The transition between the world of the living and the world of the dead is often used an exploration mechanic, which is also a spin on a classic gameplay trope seen in games like The Legend of Zelda back in the Super Nintendo days. Whether you're a player who strives for the best combos or one that likes to explore every nook and cranny for power-ups, Guacamelee has you covered. The game's combat-driven control scheme, however, might sometimes make things difficult, especially in platforming sections. If you're playing on a computer, it is definitely recommended that you use a controller, since pulling off the combos with a keyboard is much more difficult. Guacamelee is a very well-polished indie game, and it deserves a spot in anyone's must-play list of 2013. Unfortunately, the fun doesn't last very long. Experienced players will likely be able to finish the main story in only a few sittings. However, there are many hidden power-ups to be explored, and the gameplay is fun enough to warrant multiple playthroughs. To extend gameplay a little bit, it features downloadable content, which takes place in El Infierno, which is just a sequence of challenge levels.
The success and popularity of Guacamelee can be boiled down to its throwback appeal, riffing classic video gameplay design as a Metroidvania platformer, accompanied by a simple objective, saving El Presidente's daughter, represented in a playful and colorful aesthetic, and ultimately a lighthearted narrative. Despite the use of crass cultural representations and the stereotypical representation of women as damsels in distress. The success of the video game can also be attributed to its appeal to a larger hardcore gaming community with an incorporation of contemporary gameplay designs. For example, its ability to power up, its interdimensional quality of the platform game world, as well as a complex combat system, and the immersive content design that alludes to video game history and internet pop culture. The game is a successful example of the exciting, immersive, and satisfying gameplay that the indie game design can yield, and is a perfect example in its commercial success of the growing prevalence of indie games in the mainstream gaming culture. This game is recommended for a variety of player styles, from casual to hardcore. This game has a lot to offer in terms of gameplay and content. Its overall success can also be attributed to its accessibility and price. We are excited to see what Drinkbox will come out with next.